Bienvenido a un nuevo evento de Cátedra Europa.
Good morning. On the behalf of the 24th edition of Cátedra Europa, we give you a very warm welcome to the lecture Simposio sobre enseñanza de Economía en el pregrado, la propuesta de The Curriculum for Open Access Resources in Economics, core project, for which we have the special participation of Dr. Juan Camilo Cárdenas, Professor of Economics at Universidad de los Andes, Dr. Wendy Carlin, Professor of Economics at University of College of London, Dr. Leopoldo Gómez Ramírez, Assistant Professor of Economics at Uninorte, and Mr. Arham Javadev, Professor of Economics at Asim Prevni University. We now leave you with Professor Leopoldo Gómez Ramírez, who will be moderating the session. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Professor.
Hello. Well, thanks. Gracias por la presentación, Fiorella. Muchas gracias a quien esté aquí en el evento. Voy a cambiar al idioma inglés. Well, thanks a lot, everybody who is here. Well, as you know, we have today this roundtable in which we're going to discuss the core project materials for undergraduate economics teaching. And we have three guests, all of them highly great economists, I would say. That's actually the adjective I would use. We have Professor Wendy Carlin. She is a professor of economics at the University College London. And as pretty much a lot of people know, she has a lot of contributions. She has written textbooks. She has written a lot of journal articles. And I'm very happy she's here with us. Then we also have to Professor Juan Camilo Cárdenas, who, by the way, now is also at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And it's a pleasure for me to also have him. Juan Camilo was professor at Universidad de los Andes for a long time. Among other things, he was the dean of the economics department at Universidad de los Andes. He has also published many papers in journals. And we finally have to Professor Arjun Hajadev. Arjun is professor of economics at Asim Premji University in India. He's also a great economist who has published several journal articles. Well, thanks a lot for being here today. And we will have the following order of the presentation. First, Professor Wendy Carlin is going to speak about the proposal of the core project materials. Then after that, Juan Camilo and Arjun are going to speak also about the proposal. And then finally, we're going to have a roundtable, this is actually a roundtable discussions of several things of the economy, which is the most important. Well, I don't know if the most important, but it's one of the textbooks that the core project people have written. And and at the end, we will have some time for questions from the public. And well, that's it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm just going to give an introduction to what we've done in the core project. So just bear with me while I share my screen. And I'll just start the presentation. Good. Can everyone see and hear me? Yes, I assume that no news is good news. So let me get started. So here you can just get a very quick glimpse of some of the material that have come out of the core project. And this shows you a map of the world where core is being used in courses. There's at least 379 universities that are using it around the world. You can see all the countries colored in red. And a lot of these universities are using it as the main textbook on a course. So what I want to do in the minutes that I've got is to talk about innovation in economics education, teaching and learning with core. And I'm going to first begin with the intellectual basis for changing what we can think of as the benchmark model that we teach our students. And here it's kind of worth reflecting just for a second on this word core. So when we chose the name core, it wasn't just an acronym for curriculum, open access, resources in economics. It was also to signal that what this project was aiming for was to go for the core of the curriculum studied by economics majors. So we're thinking of the main courses that students take in their first and in their second years. I'm going to talk about how the core project implements this new benchmark once I've sketched what I mean by that. And then why a change in content requires a change in pedagogy as well. And then a little glimpse at the end of some of the core resources, which we'll take up in greater detail, I think, in the discussion that follows. So let me start with the intellectual basis for changing the benchmark model. And we can think of this as bringing together new problems and new economic theory. So what I wanted to start with was to draw attention to the fact that this has happened before. So we've had new problems, and this is the depression you can see here. So there was a big problem that the pre-existing economic model was very poor at dealing with. It couldn't explain persistent unemployment. And here's the new theory, okay, Keynes's general theory. It was then brought to students in a new textbook, Samuelson's Economics in 1948. And he pointed out that in physics, students were in the first year learning about atomic energy and nuclear structure. So he said, why then should teachers of economics withhold from the first year course the really interesting and vital problems of overall economic policy? He made another remark, which I think is right on point in terms of our discussion today. What he said was that the methods of analysis in his new textbook are those that have been employed by 90% of the active academic economists under the age of 50 over the last decade. So it's bringing together new economics that people are using in research with new problems. And it turned out to be a revolutionary table of contents in the book. You can see here in yellow, I've highlighted that he's pushed to the back of the book the conventional starting point of the theory of price and value, and brought to the front the theory, the modeling that's needed to understand the big problems at the time, so problems of national income. Only in chapter 19 do students get to supply and demand. Starts on page 447, stops 10 pages later, where he says, this is all there is to the doctrine of supply and demand. All that's left to do is to point out some of the cases to which it can be applied and some to which it cannot. And he then pointed out that this model, to which he devoted 10 pages, was appropriate to a few agricultural industries, and the rest needed other richer models. Okay, so let's fast forward away from the 1930s and Samuelson's textbook of 1948, and think about where we are now. What are the problems we're facing? And one way of doing this is to ask our students. So these are students at UNAM in Mexico City, September this year, where students were pointing out inequality, poverty, climate change, unemployment as the problems economists should be working on today. And our question really is, do we face another Samuelsonian moment? Are we in a situation where we have new problems and we have new economics, and we can bring them together for students in the introductory classroom? So the project began really with the momentum of the financial crisis. We now have climate change, more recently the pandemic, and this is a results from an even, a really large, more than 8,000 students in 40 universities, nearly 20 countries. And you can see that the problems they think we should be focusing on are inequality, climate change, sustainability, COVID. If you look more closely, you can see questions about the future of work and financial instability. To dig deeper, Sam Bowles and I published this article in the Journal of Economic Literature, but I'll just move on from there to try and capture very quickly the new benchmark that the core project is bringing into the introductory course. So think of it as doing a parallel thing that Samuelson did, where he brought national income analysis to the front of the book. We're trying to change the benchmark once again, reflecting the big problems that we face and the new economics that we have to deal with it. So we've got a list down here of a number of dimensions of the benchmark, and then we can see how it's handled in the conventional benchmark and introductory teaching. So people are modeled as Homo economicus. They basically interact with themselves, people like them. And what we do in the new benchmark is to go beyond that. So we say people are also cognitively limited. They have other motives than self-interest. Self-interest is very important for many of the interactions people engage in the economy, but other motives are important as well. We have to include social norms of fairness and reciprocity. We need, if we're thinking just more recently about the pandemic, for example, we have to be able to handle us versus them thinking. Think of understanding polarization and its effects on the economy. We can extend this, and I'm not going to go into the detail, which you can read further in the Journal of Economic Literature paper, but I've just picked out a couple here of social interactions, again, extending from buying and selling in markets, emphasizing non-market interactions, strategic interactions, and collective action. Taking institutions, instead of thinking of as just exogenous markets, private property, government, and so on, modeling institutions generically as the rules of the game, including informal rules and norms, and modeling these as endogenous. So again, when we think of what agents are like, they don't just differ in their preferences and in their budget constraints, but we also think about the asymmetric positions of people in the economy. For example, as employers or employees, as lenders or borrowers. Economic rents have a pretty narrowly defined role in the conventional benchmark. They're inefficient, and they originate essentially in mistaken public policy or from limited competition. But in core, we also argue that rents are absolutely essential for a well-functioning economy. That's what creates incentives to innovate, for example. And I've already mentioned the broadening out of the notion of evaluation from a narrow Pigovian one to include notions of fairness and also of environmental sustainability. Okay, so much for thinking about a new benchmark. What about implementation in a course for introductory students? Well, we begin in a very different place, not with the market supply and demand, but with how the world came to look like it does. So this is Unit 1, the capitalist revolution. We begin with lots of data, with this really long flat part of the so-called hockey stick, where living standards don't vary over hundreds of years. And then suddenly in some countries, we see this upturn in the hockey stick. Happens again later, doesn't happen in some countries. So why is that? Students, very fascinated by comparing the world that they experience with these dramatic differences in living standards according to where you were born, and how that wasn't the case hundreds of years ago. We also speak directly to this concern of students about inequality by giving them a lot of data. This is the global distribution of income, starting with countries down here at the lowest levels of GDP per capita and moving up to those with the highest levels of income. Obviously, there's something wrong with this chart if you think of it as representing the world now. This was 1980. If you now watch where China moves to, then students can get this impression about how the world has really changed over recent decades, and how those skyscrapers have become so much steeper, representing the increase in within country inequality. And presumably that's what's driving students to place inequality so high in their ranking of problems that economists should be addressing. We have a nice tool that students can manipulate. They can choose the countries that they're interested in understanding. So I've picked here Nigeria, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and Korea. We can look at inequality across these countries using rich-poor income ratio, using the visual representation of the skyscraper, and also using the Lorenz curve and calculating the Gini. So that's starting somewhere completely different from a standard intro course. The second thing that's different is that we change the order of teaching. We introduce actors and their interactions before market. So we have game theory before supply and demand. So like Samuelson, we've pushed supply and demand again towards the much later in the course. So you can see here, Unit 8 at the bottom, supply and demand. So the 8th week of the course is when students first see supply and demand curves. And the third thing is that, and I think we'll come back to this in the discussion, is that we integrate micro and macro right from the beginning. So instead of separating out those two, we teach about the economy using a set of principal agent models right from the start. So we have relationships between employers and employees. Once we do that, we have a model with involuntary unemployment. So you can see already this is taking us just to where we want to be for our modeling of the aggregate economy. So we don't have to kind of bring in ad hoc assumptions to talk about unemployment in equilibrium in the macro economy. Similarly, we have relationships between lenders and borrowers, so bank and borrower here. We have a model with credit constraints right from the beginning. So a lot of the things that we need to really understand macro are built into the actor-centered modeling from the start of the course. Why is this change in content required a change in pedagogy? To think about the conventional approach, think of the normal way of teaching is we've got some theories that we think should go into the heads of economics students. And then once we get that into their heads, we find simple applications to illustrate the theory. The core approach is really different. We start with a complex real problem, and we see that as a challenge for theory. So theory kind of has to rise to the challenge. And then once we've developed some theory, we go back and ask how well does the theory do? What does it leave out in helping us understand the problem? So let's take like the classic problem everyone has to teach in an economics course, the model of constrained optimization. So this is what happens in week 3. We start with the big question from the world and we look at the evidence. So the question is, why do working hours differ across countries and time and over time? We build a model that helps us understand what we see. So that's the model of constrained optimization. And we introduce indifference curves and feasible sets. We go back to the evidence. We compare the model with the model predictions with the data, see how illuminating it is. And then we critically evaluate the model. Can workers really choose their hours of work? What's the influence of culture, norms, and politics on this question of working hours and why they differ across countries and time? We show them some data. We develop the diagram just as you would if you were talking about beer and pizza, but now it's about hours of free time and consumption. And we go back to the data using, for example, the income and substitution effect to talk about the historical change in hours from 1900 to 2013. And then we ask what's left out. This, of course, takes us really close to what economists actually really do when they're doing their research. They start with a complex problem and then they reach for theory. And we've got lots of examples of this with really existing economists explaining how they go about this. So let me quickly finish just by showing some of the core basics. The point is that all the teaching and learning material is free online. There's lots of stuff. So point 4 here, it says the resources are very extensive, so take time to explore them. We'll touch on some of them in the discussion. And to access the teacher's resources, you do need to register, and that's just so that the students don't get access to the answers to the questions. So you need to register to get access to lots of additional teacher resources. Here's some of the ebooks that are there. Doing Economics, which is about data handling. Empirical projects. There's Experiencing Economics, which is about using games in the classroom. There are core insights, and as I said, there are answers to exercises, test bank, lecture slides, and here are the people who produced it. Here's Juan Camilo here, and here's Arjun. We're probably looking a lot younger then. And we've got, as you can see, people with expertise right across economics, from economic historians like Kevin O'Rourke, specialists in maths for economics, theorists, and so on. So I'm going to stop here. If you want a quick glimpse at what we've done, you can go to this recent article in the New Yorker, October the 8th, and that will give you some of the background to the project. So I'm going to stop sharing here.
Thank you very much, Wendy, for your presentation. Now, Juan Camilo and Arjun they are also going to speak briefly, and then after that, we will go over the roundtable itself.
Should I? Okay, so I'm going to go next, and I'm going to talk with different hats. One as an author of the project, as Wendy mentioned, and having enjoyed the process of building of this project throughout these years. But also I'm going to talk about as an instructor who has used CORE in its classes, and the experience that I have had in the past using other textbooks, and what do I feel like is useful and powerful for teaching when using CORE. And I'm going to do that by highlighting 4 or 5 issues very quickly that I think could be useful for people who are listening to us right now. I think that the one very important issue that I find with CORE is that it deals with the most pressing issues today up front from the beginning, from chapter 1. And if we talk about inequality and the environment, which are things that many people around the world are wondering about, are concerned about, but also these surveys that we keep doing with either first-year students or at the end of their careers, and when people are graduating from their PhDs, we keep listening that people are very concerned with environmental issues, climate change, and with the issues of inequality. And CORE does that from the very beginning. And when I say from the very beginning, it's not that they are extra topics outside of the main text. They are throughout the different chapters mentioned in many ways. And also there are specialized chapters digging deeper into these issues. But these are topics that are present throughout the book. A second point that I like a lot about this updated version of a textbook for today is that it has a better presentation of how humans interact with each other, either as entrepreneurs interacting with their workers or their clients or their consumers, but also how individuals interact with other human beings. And notice that this is a big leap from the standard models that we have of presenting firms as these price taker entities that make these rational decisions, or consumers that make these perfectly rational, perfectly calculated decisions. We're talking here about humans. Humans do have different preferences, more complex preferences regarding the others, more difficulty in dealing with their counterparts, either as a worker or as a business person or as a consumer or just as a neighbor. And these tools in the book are much better presented in making a more realistic human being interacting within the economy. And for that reason, it is better updated also in terms of the tools. And Wendy mentioned the book is not shy in presenting key modern economics issues like behavioral economics, information asymmetries, right from the beginning. We don't need to postpone this to later courses in economics, which, by the way, very few people take. Many people take introductory economics courses, but very few people end up taking courses in advanced topics where they learn about information asymmetries, or how to deal with inequality, or how to deal with political economy, or how to deal with behavioral economics. I think CORE is not shy to say we can teach this from the beginning and let the students, the introductory level students, to learn this from the start. History is also very much present in the book. I love that. And one of the ways, or two ways, it does it in a better way to me. One is that it's always remembering the history of ideas, the history of people that have been crucial throughout these 200 years of the discipline in renovating, in presenting novel ideas. And it does it better by always reminding us that these ideas come from somewhere. They come from someone at a specific place and time in history that created the conditions for this human to present these ideas, famous economists that have transformed the discipline throughout history. The other component of history is that there are a lot of real world based stories that are illuminating the problems and the models and the tools in the book, from what has actually happened way back in the past or in the recent times. And it's always full with narratives and examples that present the reader with situations that the reader can relate to, and not in abstract, but with things that are actually happening in the world. This also makes it possible for the book to present these agents or these actors or these humans in a more diverse way, and not in the traditional way that many textbooks have, which is what Joe Henrich has been calling the weird people, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, right? Many other humans are present in CORE, farmers from different parts of the world, fisherwomen and fishermen from many parts of the world, people in different contexts and cities and cultures. And I think that enriches the students to relate to this, as opposed to the traditional examples of the college students who are dealing with their preferences or decisions within a campus in a Western, industrialized, rich, democratic, and educated society. I think that CORE diversifies that much more. And finally, something that I like as an instructor, as a teacher with CORE, is that it's much easier to do experiments in the classroom with CORE than with the conventional text that we're used to. And this is just a suggestion that you should use classroom experiments to get your students to experience choices, decisions, trade-offs, the things that we're trying to teach. And these classroom experiments are great, but if the textbook that you're using is not consistent with the observed behavior of actual humans, then you're in trouble. And the best example that I use is the prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma in most books just says that every single human being, if rational, should free ride. And then you do a prisoner's dilemma experiment and you find out that many people in the first round want to cooperate. They don't want to free ride for many reasons. And then you are stuck between a textbook that says that every human should free ride and half of your students saying, no, I don't want to free ride. And I'm not being stupid or irrational. I just want to do it, maybe because I am altruistic, maybe because I am strategic and I want to continue a relationship of cooperation with this other partner, and so on and so forth. CORE tells this story much better with better founded elements from behavioral economics that we now know of why people do that. And then you're more comfortable with chapter 4 on presenting that. And that's just one more of many examples that I could give you of why teaching CORE with experiments is a much better fit to get your students in class excited about living the situations that we are presenting in the textbook. And those were my first notes, and look forward to hear June and then get into our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan Camilo. For once, I'm happy I'm not a weird I have been told I'm a weird person my whole life. I'm happy that for once I'm not weird. Thank you for bringing that up. Now we continue with Arjun, and then after that we go over the round table. Thank you.
Thank you, Leopoldo. And it's always hard to follow Wendy and Juan Camilo, because I'm going to be saying many of the things they said, but maybe with a slightly different perspective. And from the perspective of someone who, when I joined the project, really had in mind the possibility that this project would be something that could really take economics to teaching in India. And I've now for many years moved back from the US to India, and I teach an introductory set of courses in Azim Premji University. And part of my motivation, I think, and attraction for this process, apart from all the interesting people who are actually involved in this, was really to echo something that Wendy said, that I felt like the first introduction to economics for students, typically, at least before COVID, we did a really miserable job in economics departments across the world, certainly in the US where I was teaching at that time, because you have this very strange dichotomy. People, when you ask students, you ask them about issues surrounding the economy, and they really do care. It could be many different things. So obviously, questions like inequality, poverty, climate change, all of those, certainly those are important. But you ask them on a day-to-day level, they really want to know, what is happening when policies are being made. Why is it that we, people are saying certain things about the budget? Why is it that we're experiencing a financial crash or crisis? What does Bitcoin do? Why is it that you have asset values go up and down? These are things that people are actually very interested in. And at the same time, when you ask the average person what their first course was, you get responses like boring or not fully human. I think this wonderful thing that Camilla or someone had said that, or I forget who had said, where the humans actually disappeared from the vision of economics. Or alternatively, it's very intimidating. It seems sort of just a lot of maths, right? So I felt like it was very important to get involved with a project which was going, as Wendy said, for the core, and not sort of letting that go and saying, okay, at some point we'll get to the interesting stuff. At some point we'll get to the material which is really important and useful. So I think one of the dangers that happened because of the fact that economics pedagogy went off on a wrong track and really didn't address some of the issues that is really vibrant and important for students, is that there was a tendency for people who didn't resonate with the kind of standard 101 textbook approach to shy away from economics, to think that it's not useful, to think that it's a tool of the powerful, and so on. Now, without denying any of that, many of us who are practicing economists came to it because we really believe that it's a powerful set of tools, a powerful way of thinking about the world. In fact, if you ask me even now, there's so much in the world that you cannot understand if you don't understand economics well enough. And so I feel like one of the things that motivated me, and I'm sure many of the people in this in the collaborative project, was to establish that economics can actually be a useful and powerful tool. If you really want to know about certain things in the world, you must know economics. You must know the kind of building blocks in economics. But that only just pushes you a little forward, which is to say, what are the building blocks of economics, right? And it seemed clear that the building blocks, again, that Wendy had laid out in the standard approach didn't get you very far, and more problematically, wasn't really the basis for the way that a lot of economists thought about the world. even though in some sense it was the scaffolding, wasn't really the way that, for example, someone thought of, let's say, industrial policy or trade policy or whatever it is, that those principles were not the ones which really were what you would want to have as basic principles. And so the idea here of actually having a much vaster, more nuanced, more modern approach. We had at one time a tagline which went something like doing economics as if the last 30 years had happened. It didn't really go very far, but the idea was that it wasn't that economics had not progressed in some ways or the other, especially in the area of micro and political economy, if you will, so that we really could bring forward some of the ideas that people really used in day-to-day life as economists. So both of those things were very attractive. And then finally, I think one thing that was deeply important to me and was there right at the outset was a commitment, as it were, to say that economics is for the whole world. Not that all the economies are the same, but that really one should be looking at economics for the whole world. And what does that mean? That means that there's a commitment in the book to not only use, as many other books have had, a sort of, for want of a better word, an Anglo-American approach with maybe some cute examples thrown in from the rest of the world. There are pressing problems that one can use to illustrate from the real world that one can use to illustrate economic principles, and for which economic principles are actually essential to understand. I mean, for example, the whole question of stubble burning in North India, which is something that happens periodically in North India. You have great smog over much of the Indo-Gangetic Plain. How do you understand that? Now, that's not something, although it's extremely important and affects tens of millions of people a year, and there's always newspaper articles and so on about it. It's not something that you would typically find in a book which is used for a principles course. And so right from the outset, Wendy, Sam, others who were involved really thought of this as an international resource, something that anyone, anywhere could use. There's a very strong commitment to making it free, a strong commitment to making pedagogical tools available. We thought about translations, all kinds of things that really would expand the possibilities of economics to be beyond the standard narrow confines in which a lot of economic thinking and pedagogy were developed. Having now taught it for 4 or 5 years, I can say that I think more or less it's been really quite successful. Of course, moving as an instructor from what you're used to teaching in a 101 course to something which is more complex, more subtle, is a challenge. And many of us, we took a couple of iterations, but I do believe that over the years, I could tell with my students that there's a big difference in the way that I was engaging with the students, because I was more interested in the material and they were engaging. And it was very simple. I think the basic difference was the text allowed me to show, in some sense, and for them to feel respected as co-learners in their environment. They're interested in something in the world. They can see something in the world. The book points it out. We discuss it. We show how economics, in some sense, can contribute to this, to our understanding and its limitations, and the limitations of the way that we think about certain things, where we need to understand things better. What are our models of human behavior, for example, as Juan Camilo was talking about? How can that help us better understand certain processes in different parts of the world? So this fundamental respect for students, I think, really makes it a much, much more pleasant exercise for us. And something that follows from that is the book allows, in some sense, a much greater experimentation with pedagogy. Juan Camilo mentioned experiments. There are ways in which we've been able to bring fieldwork into the courses. There's been ways in which there's a lot of inbuilt, if you will, history of economic thought. Not as much as contending schools, but really being exposed to people who were great thinkers about the particular topic at hand. So there was a lot of experimentation with pedagogy that was allowed, and that really helped and made actually teaching exciting and the students excited. And finally, I think one of the things that has made this project, I think, quite successful, and really for this, Wendy, Sam, and Margaret Stevens and others have to be really complemented is that it's an incredibly vast collective of people who have put in effort to try to make something happen. And not everyone's going to agree on everything, and that's not the point. But almost everyone who was involved in it really felt that there could be something from this which they could get behind, which is really getting students interested again in economics, making it clear that economics is more than, if you will, a set of exercises. It really is a tool of analysis. So in all of these things, it's been extremely positive. I'll end with saying that one last thing, which will be coming out very soon, hopefully, is an adaptation of the the economy textbook in a South Asian format. So taking a South Asian perspective, more from India, from Pakistan, from other places, which may hopefully help students engage even more with the text at hand. So I'll stop with this.
Thank you very much, Arjun. Quite interesting, this stuff you're saying, that there will be soon an adaptation to a Southeastern context. Okay.
Sorry, South Asian context. South
Asian context. Okay. Well, if now we will actually go over the round table. So, Master, could you please put in the screen to Professor Carlin and Juan Camilo? Okay, here we are. Well, thanks a lot for your presentations. Now, I would like to ask you a few questions to speak about the core project. I'm gonna ask mostly about the economy, because that's the book that I know better out of all the ebooks that you have written. But that doesn't mean that you cannot speak about the other ebooks the core project has produced. So, beginning with the economy, I guess this question has been asked to you several times, but I will ask it again. Why is the book called The Economy and not Economics, which is, the standard title for introductory textbooks?
Okay, simple answer, which apparently means nothing to Spanish speakers. But anyway, in English, there are two different words, the economy and economics. And the subject of study, what students want to understand, is the economy. So that's why we call it the economy. And economics supplies some extremely powerful tools, as Arjun has made the point. But we're starting, it's to orient students and teachers to the fact that we're starting from the world rather than from a body of theory. So that's why it's called the economy.
Thank you. Now, and this is actually going to be related to several things you have already spoke about, which is, this driving motivation of the core project to have economics with like real people. Let me quote this thing that it's in the preface of the economy. There, you mentioned how Natalie Grisales, by the way, Natalie Grisales was she was a student of Juan Camilo. She wrote, I'm going to quote, "Before I chose economics, a professor mentioned that economics would give me a way to describe and predict human behavior through mathematical tools. That possibility still seems fantastic to me. However, after semesters of study, I had many mathematical tools, but all the people whose behavior I wanted to study had disappeared from the scene." Would you say that the need to address this type of concern is what drives the core project materials?
Wendy, do you want to go first, and then I can complement?
I think it's so vivid for you to answer this one.
Yeah. Okay. So Natalie was a student of mine in those early years of core, of those early beta versions. And the interesting extra story with Natalie is that she engaged in a fascinating master's thesis with me in designing an experiment in the field on trying to get people to donate voluntarily to maintain a news portal that is today quite well known in the virtual world, La Silla Vacía. And we designed the first experiment to get people, the readers of this portal, to contribute to this, which is the classical example of a pure public good. So this is a good example because Core would give you a better explanation of why people would do that. And we knew those tools. And Natalie decided to do that thesis, and she engaged in designing and putting in place that real experiment. And we collected data and money for La Silla Vacía to understand how people are motivated to contribute to something that provides well-being to others. And that was always the concern of Natalie. So when she wrote this, when mentioning about the challenges that she faced from the introductory economics that she learned in her early years when Core was not available, I think it gives us a better story of what happened. But also, she was consistent with this sentence in how she conducted her thesis, and we learned a lot from her research on how not only in the lab, but outside of the lab in the real world, people are willing to contribute to something that is a public good. Although you could free ride, but many people do not free ride, and they contribute to this because they think it's good, it's fair, it's good for others, for altruistic reasons, and many other explanations.
Yeah, okay. Maybe just to add one thing. This is a really open question and something that people are doing a lot of research on now, which is to relate our discussion today to the issue of the lack of diversity in economics. So economics really does have a women problem. And one of the hypotheses is that teaching it as economics and as a very, in a sort of abstract way, or in an abstract way with rather trivial examples, very far from modeling more realistic human behavior and problems, is something that really puts off women. So we tend to be, at least the hypothesis is that we're sort of attracting, there's a selection effect into economics using the old benchmark. And if we're going to seriously address the underrepresentation, not just of women actually, but of other underrepresented groups, then we have to address the content question. And I think that's part of the response to your question, Leopoldo.
Thank you. Now let me ask you the following. Here at Uninorte, I teach an elective course based in chapters of the economy, including the capitalist revolution, technology, population and growth, social interactions, property and power, markets, efficiency and public policy, the nation and the world economy, economic inequality, economics of the environment, and economics, politics and public policy. And I decided to name this elective course as Economics for the Understanding of Social Issues. Would you say that my decision to name this elective course in this way captures the essence of the core project?
Yeah, but I would say that I would encourage you to try and take over the introductory course.
I would like to maybe.
So it's great to have an elective course like this, but it's even greater if you can kind of capture the high ground. And all students are introduced to economics with these problems and the power that Arjun was sketching, the power of economics to enlighten us and students about these problems, these social problems, as you referred to them.
I do think that if at some point I have to teach an introductory course, because I don't teach introductory courses. Well, I mean, like, let's say in the United States, 101 courses. I usually teach 300 or 400 level courses. But if at some point I will have to teach an introductory course, it's very likely I will use chapters of the core project. And actually, this is maybe related with another question. This is from the public. This was asked by Catherine Giovanna Medina Arevalo. She's asking the following, which is actually something that I have already heard in discussions from people. The question says, some professors report that the material in core can be complex for first semester students. What can we answer to these professors, or how to better guide them to use the materials?
This is a really great question, and I think both Arjun and Juan Camilo will be able to respond. And I actually do teach in the first year classroom, so this was one aspect of the project that many of us did put our feet in the fire. And I think one response to the question is that it is more complex for the teacher than often for the student. So because it's such an unfamiliar way of teaching, it makes teachers feel very uncomfortable. So if you take the other standpoint and you think, especially of a student who has not taken a course in economics before, then they are often find it a very natural way to begin to understand the problems in the economy, how to measure things and so on. So I think that we do have to face a very, and the question hints at this as well, we do have to face the issue of really helping teachers over the adjustment costs, the costs of changing the traditional way of teaching, which have often centered on teaching a set of fairly simple algorithmic problems. And both the teacher and the student get a certain satisfaction about being able to solve these problems, and the teacher helping the students solve these problems. What we're trying to do in core is something quite different, and it certainly can be quite confronting to teachers the first time they try to do it. And we noticed that as well with helping to train teaching assistants the first time around.
Maybe I can say something about this. So the first time that I taught this core, I had exactly the same kind of concerns that that the questioner had asked, right? Which is, I was really anxious because I found it so difficult to retrain myself, and this is despite being very strongly involved in some sense in conceptualizing some of the ideas at the outset. And I would write letters to Wendy and others saying, this isn't working. But at the end of the course, what was surprising was the students seemed to like the course better than the other standard courses which were doing this at the 100 level, at the 100 level in my university at that time. And this was through feedback of various sorts and so on. As time has gone on, I've actually sort of gotten better, and that's learning curve with anything. But I also think that students who have done standard economics before have a harder time of it than people who come into it relatively fresh. And that really speaks to the fact that this is a different way of going about things. So I think that with anything that's new, it is going to be a little bit more of a stretch, as it were, to be able to do the course. But I think that there's a lot more material now available than was available a couple of years ago. A lot of fantastic questions, a lot of resources like videos and so on. So there's a lot of things that you can do, experiments, doing economics. So there's a whole ecology, as it were, that makes it much easier than it was in the past to actually use this material. And I think it only sort of strengthens the, if you will, the capacity of students as they go through to absorb this material in many ways.
And just let me say one more thing, that in a way we're creating young researchers when we teach this way. And for some teachers, the first time they encounter these budding young researchers, it's a little bit scary. So just to give you a very concrete example from last week. So last week at my university, we were teaching week 2, unit 2, which is about the Malthusian model and the escape from the Malthusian trap as one part of the unit. Now that is a complex model. It's actually a dynamic model a disequilibrium process of how you exit the Malthusian trap, and understanding the ups and downs in the Malthusian trap is quite challenging for students. But one of these budding researchers, who's been in the university for precisely 2 weeks, sends a message to the team teaching the course, with a simulation that she's created, a visualization of the Malthusian economy, in which there are a lot of dots, which are the population, and then she has a slider where you can choose things like the rate of population growth. So there are 2 sliders you can choose, and so you can see the population waxing and waning in the visualization that she's created. So, and she puts in the email, I found it interesting to try to see how this model works using this kind of technique. So this is what I mean. You get these budding researchers, and then she says, how can I improve it? And you're sort of thinking, oh my goodness, this is week 2 and they're already doing this. But we should say, wow, this is fantastic. We have a student who's already thinking, like an economist.
I would just complement just by reiterating what both Wendy and Arjun have said. I don't think this is more complex for the students. This is harder for the instructors. But if the instructors make the effort, we definitely see students more engaged and more connected to the topics. And it's worth the effort for us as instructors to change, to make the shift.
Thank you. Now, let me ask you another question. I think many people, and here I'm actually going to quote to Jeremy Roth at the Federal Reserve. Many people have expressed concerns related to the possibility, and here it comes the quote of Roth, that, quote, "The primary role of mainstream economics in our society is to provide an apologetics for a criminally oppressive, unsustainable, and unjust social order." To what extent, if any, would you agree with this type of concern? And to what extent, if any, would you say that the economy is intending to address it?
I think that this is certainly not how I think about the problem. So I don't see the economy, or what we're doing in the project, as a commentary on some poorly defined mainstream. I see what we're doing is we're taking the problems that we face, and we're reaching for the best of economics. We don't care whether the best ideas, the best thinking, the best data, the best analysis comes from someone who labels themselves in a particular way or is associated with a particular school of thought. The question is, how much insight does that work give in helping us and our students understand the problem? So I would kind of shift the lens of the question away from thinking of sort of defining things in terms of the mainstream, which I just don't find that as terribly helpful.
Do you want to go ahead, or June?
Sure, I like that Jeremy Rudd piece. As you can imagine, but it was that was just a footnote, right? It was in that particular thing, and it was really more about challenging, I think, a correct place of weakness, if you will, about expectation formation and so on. But I do think, and I think in some sense, this is my predilection, that to the extent that economics is a tool of liberating students and liberating people to think creatively about how to create a more just and a more, if you will, sustainable society, we first have to be able to ask and allow for that possibility that the world is actually unjust or unequal, or there's sustainability issues are real, and not put them at the back as an outcome, and then you explain them as an outcome of a particular set of models, like marginal productivity equals wage, or whatever it is, right? But what I liked about the first few chapters, and the aim is to say that these are real questions. And once you've established that the inequality in the world is just, incredible. I mean, you actually can see it with the skyscraper. It becomes very difficult at that point to think of this as naturalized or anything. And then you really go into looking for ways in which this can be understood, knowing what people actually do know in their lives, that there are differentials of power and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I'm not sure I'm disagreeing with Wendy, but I'm just saying that I feel like part of the attempt of this curriculum, in my view at least, is to make space for that, for the possibility of asking those questions in ways that textbooks earlier haven't.
I would agree with Arjun in the sense that at least core is from the beginning giving you a connection to these general concerns that people have against economics as a discipline and economists as agents in the world that have so much power, and the fact that economists are so powerful and in a way dangerous in making decisions that harm so many people. At least core acknowledges the role that economics has from the beginning in these major issues like the environment or inequality. But I think the sentence is a little bit harsh, and I agree with Wendy that making this distinction about what is mainstream and what is not mainstream is not going to help here. And this is something that has been coming up over and over with respect to core, of how mainstream core is. But I don't think it helps much to decide if core is or is not mainstream, or it is too neoclassical or too heterodox or not. It's about taking the real world and addressing with the best tools that economics has today. And these best tools that economics has today happen to come from people from the entire spectrum, from the left to the right, if you want to call it that way. It's just the best tools to explain behavior, to explain outcomes, and to explain how the economy works.
Thank you. And actually, now that we are actually using labels, let me bring up this question from the public. This is from Jairo Parada. I'm gonna read the question. The question says, core economics has been criticized as it remains faithful to neoclassical economics, even though it modifies some assumptions, but it neglects all the subjects that heterodox economists have brought in, and we don't see any economists from this approach in your lists as post-Keynesians and institutionalist economists.
So I think this touches on what Juan Camilo just said just now. We make a lot of use of Hayek, for example. So we place a lot of emphasis on the adjustment, the dynamics of markets and market disequilibria. So if you wanted to label that, you would say that's the Austrian school. So you could kind of raise a little flag and say, yes, the Austrian school is represented here. Then you would, go and think about the way we in core the power relationship in the firm is discussed, the relationship between the owner and the employee, and then you would say, well, it actually draws a lot from Marx. So okay, let's tick. There's the Marx school of Marxian economics is in there, but oh no, that's exactly the same model that Coase uses. So okay, good. Well, then we've got Coase as well. So I think the point is that there's a vast number of origins of ideas that are in the economy, and we are driven by trying to find good ways of explaining important problems, and we're always open to suggestions for improvement, for insights that we've missed. The macroeconomic model, for example, is a very close match to what many people in a Latin American context would think of as a more sort of institutionalist model of the macroeconomy, where the focus is on wage setters and price setters and their interaction. So I think we have a very rich vein of influences coming into the economy. Someone can probably do a very, do my kind of check mark and produce a sort of matrix.
Actually, I was thinking the following. Let's see if I can share my screen quickly. Let me show you just this, which is, I think you should be seeing now, this link of the great economists in core. And when you read this list, it's quite diverse. At least it seems to me more diverse than many other lists in other textbooks. And Wendy already mentioned some of those people here. But you have, yes, Hayek, Schumpeter, but you have also Elinor Ostrom, and you have Pigou, and you have Ricardo, and you have Albert Hirschman as important thinkers in that sense. But this is just a quick list that you can see in the entrance when you enter core in the main website, and you can jump to those and judge what can you get from this diverse set of thinkers throughout history. Of course, this list could always be improved, and there's always going to be someone else that people are going to wonder, why is this one not there? Why is that one not there? But at least it seems to me that is more diverse than what you see in many other textbooks, or even textbooks that don't mention these thinkers at all, as if they didn't exist. And as I said earlier, you need to understand the place and moment of these people when their ideas came about, and how that influenced the thinking and the understanding of the economy. But yeah, this is an important thing, and I probably would invite Jairo Parada to go to the text and take a look at this list of authors and see, yeah, they could be improved, but I think it is a more diverse list than many other textbooks that you can find around for introductory economics.
So maybe I can just say a couple of things on this. Sorry, I maybe just a word or two, and then we can go on. I mean, post-Keynesians, there's Hyman Minsky, for example, who's another person not mentioned in this. So I think it's not true, and I can say it quite clearly, that it neglects the subjects that heterodoxy brought in. I just think that's not a correct statement. What I do think people find difficult is that different kinds of schools have ways and styles of approaching economics, right, or economic theorizing. And this is not trying to say, well, if you're a Marxist, you should do labor theory of value and the 5-6 things that go around typically what a Marxian approach is. But it asks questions about exploitation, and it certainly asks questions about a class struggle between people. So that, if you will, is, I think, to me the compromise that has to be made. I mean, in some sense, it really is impossible in an introductory textbook to have 10 different paradigms built up. That's a completely different project than this one. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And by the way, thanks for bringing up this list, Juan Camilo. Another thing that I would find interesting of this list is that if you see the list, there's actually several people who were not, let's say, formally trained as economists, right? Like you have, let's say, Elinor Ostrom, right? She was a political scientist. So you have John Nash. He was a mathematician. Or you have Karl Marx. I mean, Karl Marx, he was not even in academia. He was a revolutionary. And that also shows the kind of the breadth of the core project, right? In the sense of it is, I would say it in the way that you said it, Juan Camilo. Maybe it's not as diverse as some people would like, but it is certainly way more diverse than what you would find in a standard textbook. Okay, should we move on, or do you want to comment something else?
Just let me say one thing, maybe kind of unites a bit some of the questions together, which is that I think maybe some people think that it's sort of very neoclassical because we have quite a lot of problems that can be expressed in terms of a constrained optimization problem. There's some kind of smooth, feasible set, and we're looking for a unique, stable equilibrium. And that it turns out that that's tremendously powerful for interrogating a lot of very, very different problems. But it is very limited. And Arjun mentioning Minsky reminded me that when we're now thinking about moving on with the core project, and we're thinking that we need to build up the other line of argument, which we stress a lot in the economy, but it's not exactly on a sort of even footing, which is that to give students this lens for looking at the world as one in which there are lots of positive feedback processes and situations in which there are unstable equilibria, multiple equilibria, and where tipping points are very important. And we develop a model of the housing market that works like that. We have a model of the Arctic summer sea ice that works in the same way. But I think we'd like to do more, and this is obviously pushed from the more heterodox community. We'd like to do more in equipping students with these two lenses. Some problems are really well approached using this lens of the smooth surface and the unique equilibrium. Other problems we have to be thinking much more about positive feedback processes, multiple equilibria, and tipping points.
Actually, following from Wendy, now that you mentioned it, last week I was teaching with CORE Unit 5. And in Unit 5, you can get a lot of these concerns there in terms of the power relationships. So there's a story there, very simple. There is this woman called Angela. She has land. She produces in the land the grain that she needs for her survival. And then comes this guy, Bruno, with a gun and takes all the power and all the possibilities of Angela's harvest to himself. And then there is a transformation of institutions, and then things happen. Property rights emerge, domination happens, control and bargaining between the parties depending on who's got power. I think it's a very complete, thorough analysis of how, if you want a Marxist lens on issues of power, land, property rights, and the like, you can put that there. In that simple framework of how these things happen, and yes, it is using, if you want to call it, neoclassical tools to understand from a game theoretical position what are the fallback positions of this Angela who used to own the land, of this Bruno who has a gun at the beginning, and with the gun he has power over Angela, and so on. This is just a way of doing that in the text and allowing the students to understand how power is crucial in determining outcomes and how bargaining can happen between the parties, and the bargaining possibilities depend on how much power each side has. I think it's a great example of that, and that's it in Unit 5, right after you read everything about social interactions and economic rationality.
Thank you. Let me take another question from the public. This is a big question. This is from Alexander Villarraga. He's the chair of the Department of Economics here at Uninorte. And he's asking, does implementing CORE require revising the entire curriculum in an economics program?
No, it doesn't, because if it did, we would have given up. But it doesn't mean that there's not an aspiration to spread some of these ideas about the benchmark and about pedagogy and about the student as becoming a really active participant in their learning process throughout the curriculum. So just as a very simple example, my university, we began by introducing the core course in the first year, the big first year compulsory course. The students then went into the unchanged intermediate micro and macro courses. A very interesting finding was that compared with the previous cohort, the cohort that did core in the first year did better in those unchanged intermediate courses. And we actually got more of a flow through of students wanting to do economics in their postgraduate life than had been the case before. So you can have quite an influence, even if you only change the first course. But it kind of has a bit of a ripple effect. So it tends to be a bit catching. It's hard to do, but the people who get to do it tend to become very kind of passionate about it. And so it sort of starts to have effects on other courses and on other activities. For example, other universities and we as well have a very active student research competition now. And many of the ideas are stimulated by what students what captures their imagination in that first course. Some of the other resources are now very well suited to changing the first empirical course that students do. So students often do a stats course, they do a maths course, a stats course, an economics course, and they may do an applied course as well early on. And the Doing Economics ebook is a way of changing a bit the thinking as well on introducing students to understanding data, because it begins with real data, with a policy problem and with real data sets, and then teaches students, well, they teach themselves essentially data visualization and presentation skills using either spreadsheets or using teaching themselves coding using R. So again, it's a way of kind of establishing good habits before you do a lot of theory with in a sort of more theoretically oriented statistics course. So I think that's another way where you sort of begin to have an influence throughout the degree program.
Go ahead, Arjun.
So I'll say something which is slightly different, only because I've had the luxury at Azim Print University of actually developing the whole curriculum, right? I mean, so there was a great luxury for us. And I'll say one thing, which is that having done core allows you to do many, many more interesting things if you have the luxury, and I realize most people don't, to change curricula across the board. Intermediate micro theory is much more interesting, foregrounds real issues in a way now, and we can do that because we've already gone through the core course in that sense. So while I think it's not a handicap, it's potentially an advantage if you actually can have some flexibility in other parts of the curriculum.
And let me just complement with a story that I think Arjun and Wendy were at a meeting we had at the NBER in Boston several years ago about the core project. And Daron Acemoglu was sitting in the table. And he said something that stuck in my mind. And he said that the problem we had in the training of economists is that it became the following. Micro 1 was a course to prepare students to be able to pass Micro 2. Micro 2 was a course to prepare students to pass Micro 3. And then Micro 3 was a course to prepare students to pass advanced microeconomics in grad school. And that's a huge, this is Daron Acemoglu's words. And this is a huge sunk costs that we have implemented in our programs. And it's very difficult to change entire programs. But we need to shake things up and we need to start thinking, is this what we want? And I'm talking from the perspective of microeconomics that I know much better and I have taught. Maybe macro has a different story. Wendy knows more about macro than I do. But it is interesting that we have stuck in this trap in which everything became self-dependent semesters with others within one way of teaching economics. And at least in micro is very restrictive. So we do theory of the firm and theory of the consumer in micro 1, and then we repeat it in micro 2, just with more than 2 variables. And then we repeat it in micro 3 with many variables and linear algebra. And then in grad school, we do it with much more sophisticated tools. But it's repeating entirely the main basic story that it's limited in its capacity to explain the real world. We need to shake that up. I think we need to make the effort in the programs and especially in Latin America, where the programs are so homogeneous and so concentrated to the same textbooks. Eduardo Lora and Hugo Ñopo made a study about the teaching of economics in Latin America some years ago, and it was just outrageous to see the homogeneity of the design of the undergraduate programs around the region.
Let me play devil's advocate to have some debate. I agree with you that it does not require. Using the economy in a first class does not require changing the whole curriculum, but it does seem to me it has some rippling effects. At least, for example, in macroeconomics, which is the area that I know the best. Suppose I use the core project for macro 101, and then in intermediate macro, I come up again with let's say the ISLM Phillips curve model or the aggregate demand, aggregate supply. The students are going to be like puzzled, right? Like, why did you first taught me this stuff about the monetary rule, and now you are speaking about something else? Do you see my point? And maybe also in microeconomics, like, if since the beginning, following, for example, this example that Juan Camilo was pointing out of Unit 5, if since the beginning you have these interactions between Angela and Bruno, in which power and the position in which you are born and how much property you have when you are born, and all these things are part of the analysis, and then in intermediate micro, you go again to this set in which everybody is equal and there's no power, students are going to be puzzled. So it seems to me it does have some rippling effects for the following courses.
Yeah, I think that this is true, and so let's just think about macro for a minute. So what we're doing in the first course is that we're parachuting students from the intro course to the frontier of macroeconomics, of research macroeconomics, because we begin students with models of heterogeneous agents, where from the very beginning we have involuntary unemployment and credit-constrained households, as I mentioned before. So these are exactly the heterogeneous agents that are populating all the macro models that are being used now. And why is that? It's because the macro models that are being used are addressed to questions of inequality, and because they're the questions that macroeconomists are being required and are intrigued themselves to try and address, as well as problems of financial instability. And so if you look through the topics that are making it into the journals in macro, and what the best graduate students are doing, they're all full of heterogeneous agent models, studying various dimensions of inequality. And we're preparing students really well for that in the first course. So if they then go into a course in intermediate macro where they have aggregate demand and aggregate supply, they'll be very perplexed by that, partly because it's a deeply incoherent model. It's very poor pedagogy, where it's just kind of putting demand and supply curves in a different format. And most students give you a shocking answer if you actually ask them, why does the aggregate demand curve slope downwards? They simply think it's something analogous with a single price-taking market. So this was a bad pedagogical move ever to introduce aggregate supply and aggregate demand. And what we can do is we can go straight to a form of the three-equation model. So the IS, the Phillips curve, and the monetary rule, we essentially do that, the foundations for that in the first year. And again, it's having everywhere having an actor doing something. So we have wage setters, we have price setters, and we have central banks setting interest rates, as well as households and firms making decisions, making their spending decisions. All of those things are visible in the modeling in the first year and can be taken quite readily into an intermediate course, which then leads the student into deeper analysis, for example, of the open economy, financial instability, the banking system, and so on. So we don't have to consign students going into an intermediate macro course with aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and ISLM. There are better ways of training students who are not going to go on to PhD courses, not going to become professional economists, but do want to have tools that help them understand what's going on in the world.
Okay, should I move on? Now let me paraphrasing one comment of Juan Camilo in our earlier discussions. Let me hand the magic wand to the core. Suppose you could design the whole set of classes economics undergraduate majors should take. How would it be?
Arjun, do you want to share the experience there?
Well, actually, it's a sort of unique experience, but let's sort of focus on what you can get from core, I think, which is, that might be a little bit more helpful, because if you have to design a whole curriculum, there's a lot of different opinions about how to do that. And I'll speak specifically about what potential there is, for example, from intermediate micro course and some of the kind of things that some of my colleagues have been able to pull off. A lot more is done now using computational tools and thinking through things like networks and thinking through things like agent-based approaches and so on. And one of the nice things about the way that the intermediate micro courses go and some of our honors students start to take off from that is that it allows people to go quite close, as it were, to more frontier ways of thinking about this. Wendy mentioned the person who started with the slider and the modeling approach like that. But the intermediate micro course that we teach allows people to do much more in that vein. And really, you see some really excellent honors theses which follow as a result. I think one thing that we do in the which again is something that can come because we have something like the core as a foundation, which has these many different individuals, whether it's Marx or Hayek or Eleanor Ostrom and others, is we have a political economy course where we take, if you will, away from maybe the discussion, which is a more analytical discussion or a more technical discussion, to really asking questions about what were the debates really about. So again, because they've had a foundation and they know that, for example, you have Ronald Coase and Marx both talking about, if you will, the kind of issues that are there in the workplace, that can become a focus of a set of courses by themselves. Macro is, of course, a lot more complex because there's two different ways of taking it. One is to build up, as Wendy was talking about, from our approach to maybe even Wendy's own textbook. The other approach is to take it again as a macroeconomics as different sorts of paradigms which have come one after the other. And that's another approach that people have taken. But since we are talking about core, I think it does open up the space for a much vaster experimentation with especially the intermediate courses, and allows people to go to frontier research much more easily.
Can I add to that the following that kept me thinking a lot from a colleague at the Los Andes University in Colombia. He's a faculty from the School of Education, and he works a lot on critical thinking. And his approach to critical thinking was the following. The challenge is to get the students to master 3 levels for a serious, profound critical thinking. And I think this applies to economics. And in fact, I wrote something about this back in a blog post some years ago. The first step is to master the tools. The next step is to be able to compare the tools and be critical of how each tool differs from the others. Tools, you want to call it schools of thought or approaches. And then the third step is to evaluate the consequences of using those tools on society. So mastering the tools, contrasting the tools critically, and understanding the impacts of the tools on society. I think this applies perfectly to economics. So the rethinking of a program of training economists, people who are going to affect the lives of others, with core, let's say, it's going to have all these issues. And I think core is better prepared for doing that, in the sense that it's giving you some tools, but it's giving you also comparisons of other tools. I know you could be more inclusive in many more approaches from many schools, but at least several of the key schools of thoughts are there. And we need to train them in contrasting the different approaches to that problem, and then understanding the consequences of this. Let me give you yet again one more example in core. The idea of evaluating policies, not only in terms of the utilitarian approach of a Pareto efficiency criteria, but also in terms of fairness. It's a big step in the right direction. Fairness is important. Many people care about fairness. From where we are very little and we're negotiating with our siblings, brothers and sisters, if that was a fair or not decision by our parents. We are always complaining about fairness. All the time, people are concerned about fairness. We need to include that. So if we go through those 3 steps of critical thinking, I think one can think of how to reshuffle and redesign a whole program in training economists to be able to master the tools, compare them with each other, and then evaluating the impacts on society. That could be a guideline to rethink how we create a curriculum or a program for training economists in our universities.
Thank you. Let me take another question from the public. Actually, some of my colleagues who teach introductory courses here at Uninorte, they are telling me that they actually use some materials of the economy, not as the main textbook, but as supplementary material. One of my colleagues, Sandra Rodriguez, she's asking the following. Actually, we use the Economic Core Project textbook at the Universidad del Norte in Introduction of Economics course. In that courses, we have students from different programs. And when I asked them why they are interested in economics, the immense majority said because they wanted to help to reduce poverty and inequality. And they want to learn economy because they want to be politician and work for it. How do you think a professor can connect such interests using the core textbook? And do you believe that it's necessary to comment something about ethics in the text?
Yes, maybe I can start off. Perhaps a good thing. This is maybe a good moment as well to tell people to have a look at the green textbook, Economy, Society and Public Policy, because that one was designed really specifically not for majors, if you like, not for students who were majoring in economics, but for students who had particular policy orientation. And so it's actually being used in many undergraduate courses, but also in Master of Public Policy courses. And that, so that sort of really, I think there's a strong policy orientation to the economy, but there's an even stronger one, orientation in ESPP, and the second unit, I think the second or the third unit, focuses really very specifically on this question of how do you evaluate a policy. Every time you come across a policy, then you have to evaluate it from the perspective both of efficiency and of fairness. And there's a very extended discussion with lots of examples of very practical policies, both in that initial presentation in ESPP and then later on in the as you work through. And if you quickly look at Unit 12 of ESPP, there are a number of examples that relate very directly to the question asked there. And yeah, the question of ethics and values is an important one. And I think what we try to make very clear is that there's no sense in which we can say this is fair or this is not fair, but we want to give students some language and some concepts that they can use to discuss these aspects, these policy outcomes. So economists shouldn't just kind of turn the other way and say they're not going to think about it. We need to bring these two questions very much to the forefront of our students' thinking whenever they are evaluating a policy outcome.
So let me quickly just add, especially for these topics, more than in most intro textbooks, they actually have a very strong presence in the core textbook. Poverty and inequality, we start with inequality. And there are real-life examples of what people have done to address questions of inequality and so on. There's a whole set of questions about sharecropping and what happened with a different set of policies in West Bengal. Similarly, there's a lot of exercises about what would happen if you undertook policy X or policy Y, and that's not just an ESPP. That's sort of shot through the core textbook, and there's one entire unit as a capstone unit that deals with that. So I think that these two topics, I would say certainly more than any standard introductory textbook, there's a lot of material on those particular topics.
Okay, we are running out of time. We have just 20 more minutes. Let me ask you now a question specifically for Juan Camilo, because he is the one who has been leading the translation of the economy into Spanish. So Juan Camilo, if you could speak about this Spanish version of the economy.
Yeah, I mean the process for the Spanish translation was very similar to the original project in the sense that it is a collective effort of many people chipping in and some of them doing voluntary contributions to the project, and of course there were formal translators that were paid for making the main text happening, and then lots of collaborations from students from around the world. Because we had people from Spain and Latin America helping in revising the chapters and in revising the graphs and the tables and the like. Also collaboration regarding the jargon, the use of terms. I many times mentioned the debate that we have in economics textbooks talking about costs, whether we should use the word costes or costos. These kind of things were the product of a collaboration around many places and many people. And you can find in the core version in Spanish a mention to all these people. And that collaboration, I think, enriched a lot the process. Just as in the original core, it was a huge collaboration of many people. You don't see that often in economic textbooks. Many economic textbooks are one or two authors who came up with the entire set of concepts and philosophy. Here, of course, Wendy and Sam Bowles led a lot of these efforts, but many people contributed from their own perspectives and their own positions. And in the Spanish version, having students and also instructors collaborate has been a great experience. And I have been interacting with people who have been using core more regularly, particularly in Uruguay. And in Uruguay, in the Universidad de la República, we kept meeting almost every semester for the last couple of years for events with the instructors and talking about improving the methodology, using more experiments and more tools from core. And this has been a really nice, interesting collaboration. And I hope we can expand this to other universities and other countries in which the Spanish version can be of use.
Thank you, Juan Camilo. Let me take another question from the public. This is from Juan David Parra. He's also a professor here at Uninorte. And he's asking, what is your main advice for students for exploring alternative theories to attempt at answering specific research questions? Should they seek the best possible theory before they start doing empirical work?
No, they should they should go and get a very good empirical sense of their question. And this is one of the things we stress in doing economics in terms of looking at the data, gathering the data, looking at the data, visualizing the data. So and a lot of the examples in core where we have kind of we emphasize the role of narrative. So in trying to formulate your problem, you often need to be able to tell a verbal story. Try to explain to someone who isn't an economist why this is an interesting problem and why it's an important problem. And trying to sort out your ideas in that way is I think the kind of practice we've used throughout, trying to build the kind of coherent relationship between the empirical, the historical, the narrative, and the theory in core. And I think that's really the way economists work, right? We think of a problem that we're trying to solve, and we have some motivating data and some motivating examples, and then we kind of look around and figure out the most appropriate modeling that will help us shed light on it. So that's how I would think of it, and connect it very closely to the way we built the material in core.
No, I agree entirely with Wendy, and this comes back to the very first question: why is it called the economy and not economics? Because this is about the real world. So you start from the problem and the analysis of the reality and gathering some data and some facts, and with that you begin to work throughout that problem situation from the real world, and then it would be very interesting to attempt to answer those questions, as Juan David said, from different perspectives, different school of thoughts, different approaches. And this is part of what I was thinking about training people in critical thinking. It's about mastering these tools, but then contrasting the tools. But you have to start from the problem, from the actual world, and especially the data, the facts that describe the problem. And that is critical these days. Start from the facts and from the actual data. And many people in economics is incredibly it's agonizing. Go to the social media and Twitter, looking at people who are trained in economics, making claims without empirical support and making outrageous claims with a data point and an anecdote. And you wonder what kind of training in economics this person had, that they forgot that you need to get the facts and the data right and then begin to deal with the approaches.
Thank you. Well, actually, you already spoke a little bit about the other ebooks. I mean, in addition of the economy that the core project has written, but if you could elaborate more on them, these other ebooks, economics, society, and public policy, and doing economics and experience in economics, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. So I think. I gave a brief introduction to ESPP. So you can think of that as the green one. That's the it's short. It's 12 units. It's very policy oriented, and there's quite a lot of overlap with the economy, but it's designed. It doesn't have the Leibniz's, it doesn't have the kind of mathematical representation of the models. So it's more designed for students who are either in graduate public policy study or undergraduates who are not planning to go on in a major. So that's ESPP. The 12 units of ESPP are exactly matched one for one with 12 empirical projects in doing economics. So you can create a really nice course, which is a very empirically driven course where students gain great skills, employability skills, as we're always told our students need. So this is data handling skills, data visualization, coding if they choose to do it through R. And there's this nice matching of one project, and they're quite meaty projects. Students learn, if they do one or two of those projects, they learn how to make a professional presentation of a data-based policy analysis. So that's the match between ESPP and doing economics, but the doing economics projects are also keyed to parts of the economy. So you can use them with the economy as well, or you can use them as a self-standing course in a first course in applied economics. And the big emphasis, as we've all said, is on understanding the data, and that ties in with what we have a lot of in core in the economy, which is emphasis on understanding causation and understanding how to use data to shed light on causal mechanisms. So we introduced students to natural experiments very early on. So our students were found it very easy to understand the Nobel Prizes this year, for example. So that's the ESPP and doing economics. Then there's experiencing economics, which Juan Camilo referred to. And this is an ebook that has two parts. One is for instructors and one is for students. And the idea is that the ebook for the instructors has very detailed explanations, a lot of hand-holding, and a lot of reported experience of teachers implementing experiments in the classroom. So they use the ClassX platform, and it really is easy to follow, and even the most timid person can try. We had a non-timid person, but actually someone who'd never done it before, who tried one of these experiments in an online class of 770 students last year, and it worked perfectly. The student interface doesn't frame the experiment, because you don't want the students kind of knowing what other people have played in the game. So that's why we've got these two completely separate kind of interfaces for each of the experiments in experiencing economics. And that's a really lively ongoing project, with more experiments coming on every couple of months or so, coming into that ebook. I also wanted to mention a new thing that we have called Core Insights. And these are self-contained learning modules on different topics. So we have 3 at the moment. One is on Too Big to Fail, which is about financial stability and the reforms resulting from the financial crisis. That's a great example of how core is kind of spreading out beyond the universities, because that's authored by Claudia Buch, who's the vice president of the Bundesbank and heads the Financial Stability Board. So she wanted a self-contained resource resting on cores, the economy, the economy's treatment of banks and financial instability, that could go deeper, and it's suitable for a more advanced undergraduate course or a master's course, or in her case, and the people in central banking and regulation, they need these resources for training. So have a look at the Core Insights. There's another one on financing American government, which really focuses on the financing challenges that arose with the pandemic, but really explains the mechanics, the weird mechanics of American public finance. And then the third one is on inequality, and is a really nice self-contained way of teaching. If you really want your students to kind of get into inequality, or they're desperate very early on, you can teach this without having a lot of, without having preconditions. And it's got some very nice activities for students in there. So that's the insights. Then there are some other things. If you look on the website, you should go to the selection, right? The selection that's is supposed to tempt you to have a look. And you'll find there a very nice interactive simulator to understand the pandemic. So this is built around a network through which the disease is transmitted, so the epidemic transmission, and then it's also overlaid on that the economic relationships between the nodes of the network. And the user, the student, can interact with the epidemic process, but also you can modify the extent of the gains from trade relationships between the nodes, and how they're affected by the speed with which the disease is progressing. So that's the pandemic, the COVID simulation. And actually, I should probably stop at that point.
Well, thanks a lot. Let me also stress to the public that in addition of the contents of the ebooks being, in my opinion, really good, all the contents are also free, which is also something to take into account. I don't know you, but here in Uninorte, we do have a lot of students that they just cannot afford, like a $150 textbook for each class. That's not affordable for most of our students. So let me stress that in addition of everything, of all the quality of the contents, it is free to access to the ebooks. And well, I think we have time just for like closing remarks. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Just let me say that all the resources are free to anyone who's interested. So you don't have to be a student, you don't have to be a teacher to access all of the resources. And you can have fun playing with those skyscrapers to look at global inequality. You can explore and sort of deepen your understanding of the pandemic. There's a load of stuff that's kind of interesting and entertaining, I think, for people with very wide interests. So I'd encourage everyone to go on the website and just explore and see what you can find. And we're very, very open to feedback. So please, we crowdsource our corrections. So please get in touch to help us make this a better resource that everyone can benefit from.
Azad, get away from the back.
I also, in closing, thank you, Leopoldo, for organizing this and for getting interested in this project. One reason that I always enjoy talking about CORE is precisely what you said, that this is not trying to sell something from which we're going to profit. This is free for everyone and anyone, and we have contributed to this project precisely because of that, so that many more people get access to this. And we also solve the problem that Leopoldo mentioned about the students not being able to afford textbooks. It's a huge problem around the world, or they get very bad quality copies. And we are trying with this project to make this available to many people so that better opportunities of up-to-date material is accessible to many other instructors and many other universities around the world. Several translations are available now. So this all contributes to make a better set of tools for training economists, which again I think is an important part of academia, precisely because many people take courses in economics, even if they don't want to be graduating from an economics major. Many majors in other disciplines take introductory economics. So this is a way of trying to influence in the training of all these people. So thank you for organizing this.
Well, thank you very much for accepting to participate in this roundtable. I do hope this is going to help to keep spreading the use of the core project materials. I do believe, this is my personal opinion, subjective as all opinions are, I do believe this is a much better approach for teaching undergraduate economics than the, let's say, average other textbooks. So I appreciate a lot that you have taken the time for doing this roundtable. Also, I appreciate a lot that we were able to coordinate because, you know, Juan Camilo is in Massachusetts, Wendy is in London, and Arjun is in, I guess he's in Bangalore in India. So thanks a lot to all you three for participating in this. It was my real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, our guests, for their special participation. And thank you also all the attendees for joining us in this session of Cater Europa. We invite you to continue supporting the education of talented students through our scholarship fundraising campaign, más becas by clicking on the donations button on the homepage of Cátedra Europa. We also encourage you to stay connected to the rest of Cátedra Europa's events. Have a nice day.